coming out today. I see several of y'all in the back. There are some chairs up at the front if any of you guys are looking for a seat. I'm so glad you guys are with us. My name is Tim Bright. I'm the director of ReForm Shreveport. I'm here with my co-founders, Livette Fuller, and that's Livette, and Chris Lyon, and Luke Lee. Oh, is there any elected officials in the room?
Oh, wait.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming today. We started about 3 years ago with Chuck coming into town. Ever since I've lived here, I've thought that the reforming of the core of our city was one of the most important things and one of the most important challenges facing us. And so we started about 3 years ago, and we hosted Chuck, and he gave us some great steps to follow our mission. So I'm so excited for y'all to hear more about that today. I do have a couple notes about some of our sponsors. We have the Downtown Development Authority and Liz Swain. They've been so good to us over these past 3 years. Yes. We've also been sponsored today by the 3180 podcast. That's Josh Clayton and Thomas Young. They've got some great content out there if you guys want to find out more about what's going on in Shreveport. That's the 3180 podcast. We're also sponsored by the Interest Arts and Entrepreneur Center and Jim Mulch. Thank you so much, Jim. And also by Heliopolis. That's Chris's baby, and Heliopolis is doing a lot of good things too. Alright, so I think that does it for our sponsors. There are restrooms in the back here or in Parish Taco if you need to use those. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chuck Marohn and Strong Towns.
Let's try this. There we go. Hey, thank you so much. This is very impressive. And seriously, they told me this is a Baptist thing. It's also a Catholic thing, just so you know, to leave chairs empty up front. We always tell ourselves we're leaving them for the big families. But it never works out that way. There's a couple up here, and there's some down the aisle here if you're interested. Thank you so very much. It's very nice to be back in Shreveport again. The last time I was here and did a public presentation like this, I was very inspired by you, inspired by this community, inspired by everything that's going on. Coming back now, what I think is for the fourth or fifth time, I'm blown away. I had a day today that was absolutely amazing. Got to tour parts of the city, see things that had changed, meet entrepreneurial people, some of the coolest people that I've met in a long, long time. This is a great city. And I don't say that every place we go. Jacob, my partner back in the back here, one of my work colleagues, will tell you that I really like this place. And it'll be obvious as we go through this conversation tonight why I like this place so much. But I do, and I just want to thank you for showing up and being this is a nice big group, and I really, really appreciate it. We are here tonight because at Strong Towns, we released a book. October 1st, we have a brand new book that came out. It's called Strong Towns, incidentally, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity. I'm going to tell you, I don't usually do this because I'm Minnesotan. I kind of like soft pedal the book. I'm going to tell you right now, this is an awesome book. And the thing that is awesome about it, most of all, is that the afterword was written by Shreveport's very own Livette Fuller. Where are you at, Livette? As we were finishing this book and putting it together, the question was posed: who should write a foreword? Who should write an afterword? And it was kind of put to us basically like, who famous do you know? Who's like a a big name person doing marquee things. And I said, well, I know who that is.
That's not what happened.
That's exactly what happened. I said, I want someone who embodies in their actions, in their deeds, and in who they are, what we're all about at Strong Towns. And it was a very easy ask for us to look to Shreveport and to the great things that you've done. I know, and you said in the book that we have inspired you. I want you to know that you and the whole ReForm Shreveport group has inspired us. So let's do this. Just real brief, I'm going to go back one slide. Strong Towns, my name is Chuck Marohn. I'm the president of this organization. The whole thing started out as me writing a blog. I'm an engineer and a planner. I started writing about cities. I'll save you all the details if you want to read them. They're in the book. I wound up writing a blog. It's grown into this crazy thing where we can do an event and all you great people show up. We do this all over the place. I was in Lafayette, Louisiana last night. We will be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for the next 3 days. I'm going to give like 7 presentations in the next 72 hours. So we're out. Our mission is to support a model of development that allowed our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. We start this conversation with Detroit. This is the way I end the 3rd chapter of the book, by talking about Detroit. And we talk about Detroit because everywhere that I've traveled, and I've been in every U.S. state on the continent. I've been to Alaska or Hawaii as part of Strong Towns, but I've given a presentation in all 48 states and in like 8 Canadian provinces. Everywhere I go, there's somebody who wants to talk about Detroit. If you're on the political right, you have an entire narrative about what has gone on in Detroit. It's internally coherent and consistent, but it has nothing to do with the narrative of if you're on the political left. There's an entire conversation on the left interpreting what has happened in Detroit and explaining it in terms that are comforting there. There's really only one point of agreement, and it's the one point of agreement about Detroit that I get in every community I visit and every person that I talk to, and it is this: we are not Detroit. Our city is not Detroit, and what happened in Detroit is fundamentally different from anything that could possibly happen here in our city. Let me give you the Strong Towns narrative of Detroit. In the early 1900s, before Henry Ford, before the automobile, Detroit was one of the most wealthy cities, not just in the continent, but in the world. Detroit was a place of such fabulous riches that you can go there today and you can still see these magnificent buildings. If they were picked up and dropped into, the greatest European capitals today, they would not be out of place. This was a very, very wealthy city. And as it was on its way to becoming the Motor City, Detroit was the first city to experiment with this new, what would become the North American development pattern. They were the first ones to run highways through the middle of their neighborhoods. They were the first ones to have people live out on the edge of town and commute in the morning for work, commute back out at the end of the day. They were the first ones to, at a large scale, start to tear down buildings in order to make parking lots. And by the time we got to the Great Depression, and cities around the country started to go into bankruptcy and failure and have huge amounts of distress, there was one city in particular that did fairly well, that being Detroit. By the end of World War II, it was very clear to local leaders all over North America what they needed to do if they wanted to experience growth and prosperity. They needed to copy the development pattern of our most successful city, that being Detroit. And that's what we did. We all set out to copy their development approach, their road and street standards, their zoning approach, the way they went about building their places. Detroit is not some crazy anomaly. It's not some weird place different from any of ours. Detroit is just early. Detroit's just a couple decades ahead of everybody else. When you take a wealthy city and you spread it out over this broad area, denuding the tax base in the process, you wind up with the economics of Detroit. Like all bankruptcy, it happens gradually and then all at once. My mom got an advance copy of the book, and when she got to the end of chapter 3, she called me and she said, "Chuck, This is a very depressing book. I told her, hang with it, Mom, it gets better. My mom will attest it gets better. But I like to start with Detroit because what Detroit did is Detroit took a system that was complex and adaptive and changed it to one that was merely complicated. Let's talk about the differences. Complex adaptive systems, we can think of something like a rainforest. We understand that a rainforest is made up of many independent acting flora and fauna. They all are capable on their own of receiving input and feedback, of responding to stress and opportunities in unique and novel ways. When we look at complex adaptive systems, their properties are said to be emergent. It's not an order that is created, but the order actually emerges out of all these myriad of complex interactions. We grasp this when it comes to natural ecosystems like a rainforest, but the same holds true for human habitat. When we look at the way humans assembled and built their places over thousands and thousands of years, what we see is the same kind of adaptive framework. An adaptive framework where internal feedback loops based on stress and opportunities created an incremental development pattern where the underlying result was chaotic, but the result that we see is this emergent set of properties. These are complex adaptive systems. This is different than something that is merely complicated. A Rube Goldberg machine is very complicated. It takes some smart people to assemble one of these, to put it together. But we understand that if you go in and you cut one of these strings or you move one of the blocks, the machine doesn't evolve and adapt. It just simply breaks. Think of your automobile engine. If you stress your automobile engine, if you push it past the point that it's designed to go, even though it was designed by some very brilliant people, some very intelligent people put together this complicated machine, your automobile engine won't morph into a toaster or a wash machine. It just breaks. It ceases to become an engine. This is the inherent difference between systems that are complex and adaptive and systems that are merely complicated. Complex adaptive systems are able to adapt to stress over time, where complicated systems are not. They are, in a sense, fragile. When we look at natural ecosystems, we understand that if a rainforest receives too much rain or too much sun in any one spot, the system doesn't collapse. It just evolves and adapts. New arrangements emerge, new flora and fauna take over. If we do the same thing to a cornfield, the cornfield doesn't adapt. If the cornfield gets too much sun or too much rain, it doesn't evolve and become soybeans. It just stops being corn. You have a condition where it either works or it doesn't work. We see the same thing now with human habitat. When we look at cities of the past, we look at the traditional development pattern, what we see are cities that were designed to survive and thrive in many different types of conditions. Conditions of plenty, conditions of want, conditions that were bountiful, conditions that were stressful. We see habitat that is able to adapt and change to our growing needs and different stresses and different opportunities. When we look today at the way we build cities, what we see is a habitat that, while very complicated, yes, requires many smart people to create this and build this, it ultimately loses that adaptability. It has become, in a single word, fragile. When we look at the way complex human habitat is created, what we see is this incremental development pattern. Everything at the base level is very simple. It's the complex interaction of all these parts that create the emergent phenomenon. This is the way every city started prior to our great post-war experiment. Every single city that was ever founded, including Shreveport, began like this. A series of little pop-up shacks, a collection of hopes and dreams. This is my hometown, Brainerd, Minnesota, back in 1870. I live a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is what it looked like 150 years ago. We built thousands of these across North America, and for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact. A lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Does unemployment skyrocket? Does the stock market crash? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out banks? Of course not. These are little bets. The people there salvage what they can, they move on to the next place. We built thousands of places just like this across this continent. And for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, they would grow in a very simple to understand way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. As more and more people moved to the place, the underlying land values would increase. This would create a natural redevelopment pressure. We would see these little shacks be torn down or remodeled, and after 30 years of incremental growth, this little street of pop-up shacks would become this exact street here. And after another 40 years of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and incrementally becoming more intense, the rising of a place, the underlying land values would continue to go up, driving this natural redevelopment pressure, and these 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. This is that emergent system, and you can see it at work in your own place. I spent the day, a big part of the portion today, going around your city. And you see in the mature areas, the areas that were mature by the time we got to the end of World War II, they had these buildings that you can see had some significance to them, had some magnificence to how they were built. They were 2nd and 3rd generation buildings. And you could go to other parts of the community where they never got to the 3rd generation, where they never got to the 2nd generation. And you could see all these iterations. Of course, after World War II, we stopped building in this incremental fashion. We started to build cities all at once to a finished state. We went out and we transformed entire blocks, entire fields, entire areas all at once, and when we built it, it was done. Today, here's what this exact same street now looks like. It's a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. And if you want to grasp in one snapshot why my city struggles, why your city struggles, why cities all over North America struggle to maintain basic infrastructure, to provide basic services, to meet just basic needs of people, understand that we've made $500,000 investment in public infrastructure in that street. Where is the wealth that is going to sustain that investment decade after decade after decade? It used to be there. It's not there anymore. It's important to pause and understand why we made this shift. And I say that because I believe very strongly that we should be generous as we can in our interpretation of the intentions of the past. We are screwing up many things today. Those things will be revealed at some point in the future as screw-ups. I hope the people who reveal those things are generous to us. I think it's important to understand why we made this shift from a complex, iterative way of building cities to something that was merely complicated. My grandfather grew up during the Depression. He lived in the neighbor's barn. The neighbor would feed him, allow him to live in the barn if he worked the fields. That's how he spent many years during the Depression. This was in Minnesota, by the way, so living in the barn, not exactly a great thing. It was better than the alternatives he had presented to him. My grandfather was a Marine during World War II. He was part of the first group into Nagasaki after the bomb was dropped. The second atomic bomb was dropped. He told me at one point that if it hadn't been for FDR, he would have died. I don't know if that was true or not, but when you read back stories of the Great Depression, what you see is a population that was very, very confused, terrorized, and in many ways demoralized by what was going on. No one understood what caused the Depression. At the time, nobody knew. Even today, we have economists that will write books about here's the cause of the Great Depression, and it will vary from another economist who writes a book about here's the cause of the Great Depression. We still don't really understand. It was ultimately like a breakdown of a complex adaptive system. More importantly, nobody knew how to get out of it. The entire New Deal project was an attempt after an attempt after an attempt to try a bunch of things to see what would work. How do we get the economy going again? The only thing that got us back to work, back to something near full employment, back to something that looked like economic growth, was a world war, where we took millions of working-age people, shipped them off overseas to kill and to die, took millions of other people, put them to work in factories, building the implements of destruction. The boats, the ships, the planes, the munitions. Towards the end of the war, when it started to become clear that we were going to win, that the Allies would triumph, it was just a matter of time, the economists back here that were advising FDR started to panic. This is a quote from Paul Samuelson, one of the president's senior economic advisors. What they believed is that when we demobilized all these troops, when the war was over and we brought them all home, when we shut down all these factories building all this stuff, then what we would ultimately end up with was right back into the Depression. Nothing was different about our economy than a decade earlier, and we were just going to slide right back into the depths of the Great Depression. Of course, we have the gift of hindsight. We know that's not what happened. What happened is something fundamentally different. We built a brand new version of America. We took all that industrial might, all that industrial capacity. We were the only Western power not decimated by war. We literally had the gold. We had the world's reserve currency. We had lots of oil. We had lots of coal. We had a nation united in war and in battle. And we took this unified spirit and we said, we are going to solve the greatest problems that humanity has ever faced, starting with the number one problem. What's the number one problem that humans have always faced? How do you split one loaf of bread between two hungry people? Go read your Old Testament. Go read your New Testament. This is the whole story of Jesus, was how do we do this? What is the moral way to split a loaf of bread between two people? These guys solved it, or they were on their way to solving it. Their approach, we create a second loaf, and a third loaf, and a fourth loaf, and a fifth loaf. If we can create an economy that grows and grows and grows, the prosperity and abundance that results from that will allow us to solve all of these nagging problems, all of these things that have burdened humans for thousands of years. And here's the amazing thing. It actually started to work. In many ways, it actually worked. We still nostalgize today those couple of decades right after World War II as this amazing time of prosperity. Back in our last presidential election, what did we have? We had two 70-year-old candidates looking back at the best years of their life, explaining to us how they were going to bring that back for us again. Whether the vision was blue-collar jobs and Aussie-inherited families, or whether the vision was a federal government that could be generous and bountiful, that could do programs like the Great Society and urban renewal. These two candidates were both talking about the same exact period in American history, those couple of decades after World War II. We created a kinetic growth machine to drive prosperity. And the theory was we would use that prosperity to benefit everyone. And this worked. When we look at cities and their pattern of growth, we created a machine that grows very, very quickly. This is a map of Fresno, California. We use Fresno in this presentation because we've got great maps of Fresno, but we could literally use Shreveport if we had the maps. It's going to look the exact same way. Here's the growth of Fresno prior to World War II. Now we get to the end of World War II and that kinetic growth machine kicks in. And watch what happens. A massive, massive shift in the way we build. We no longer build incrementally on a continuum improvement, incrementally up, incrementally out. We build in a all at once to a finished state pattern. My city, my little town, at the end of World War II was 13,500 people. Today, my little town is 13,500 people. It's 10 times the size. When we think about, and go back to the very beginning where we talked about Detroit, when we think about the trade-offs of this development pattern, when we look at it over time, they become very, very clear. This is data from Lafayette. When we go back to the end of World War II, they had a population of a little over 33,000. That's now grown to over 120,000, so 3.5 times increase. But when we ask the question, how much does it take to provide water to the people of Lafayette? At the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person. Now it takes 50. It's a 10 times increase. What does it take to provide them with fire protection? Well, that's a 21 times increase over where they were at the end of World War II. What we see over time is that it takes more and more input to get the same level of output. This is a pattern with diminishing returns. We grow and grow and grow, and we take on more and more and more liabilities. This would be okay, and we could justify this in a way if we were becoming wealthier. If we stepped back and we looked at our families, our neighborhoods, our small businesses, and we said they are growing more prosperous over time. But as we all understand, while our population grows by 3 times, our liabilities grow by 10 times and 20 times. When we look at individual family wealth, it only grows a tiny, tiny fraction of that. Our families all over this country, our small businesses, we see saving less. We see them taking on greater levels of debt. We see incomes and wealth stagnate. And we see families becoming more and more fragile and desperate, just like the underlying development pattern in which they now live. There's a reason why this is happening. It's not some weird thing that's unfathomable. It's actually very, very simple. When you create a machine for growth, you forego all the other feedback mechanisms that are involved in complex adaptive systems. Feedback systems such as this. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. If you look at them, they're the same size, the same area, they have the same amount of public infrastructure, they cost us the same amount to provide service to. That block on the left looks like that. It is the pop-up shack of the 1920s. If you think back to that 1870 photo of the pop-up shacks, this was the building that you would have done on the far edge of the city in the 1920s. Had things continued as they had for thousands of years, what would these people have seen? They would have seen ultimately 2nd and 3rd stories, buildings that were more intense, more ornate. Of course, that's not what happened. These were built. Then we had the Great Depression, we had World War II, and now we have this kinetic growth machine that skips right over these places and starts building hyper out on the edge. These buildings have stagnated for over 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. Now we got the new Taco John's drive-thru. We tore down all those buildings and we built a Taco John's. Tim, you all don't have Taco John's here, right? Taco Bell. No, it's not near the same. Let's be serious here. Taco John's is, you can think of it as Norwegian Mexican food. They're best known for tater tots that are like thin, like cut in thirds maybe, dipped in mild cheddar cheese. Exactly like they do in Mexico. So we got a Taco John's. We were really, really thrilled about this. We got rid of a block of blight. We got something that's shiny and new. Everybody was happy about this. It met all the zoning code requirements. It got the right floor area ratio, the right amount of green space, the right amount of parking, the right sign. It met all the building code requirements. It's got a sprinkler system and ADA bathrooms. It met all the financing requirements for secondary market. It met all the insurance requirements. The environmental people showed up and said, hey, would you put native plants in the stormwater area? They did that for them. The bike walk people came and said, would you put in a sidewalk? They put in a sidewalk. It ends right there, but they put that stretch in. When you look at everything in our kinetic growth checklist, this checked every single box. Here's what nobody bothered to consider or look at. That old blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, it's the same area, the same size, the same amount of public infrastructure, the same cost to us as a community, yet the tax base is only $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development, that complex adaptive way that we built cities incrementally and iteratively over thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at that in its infant phase after almost a century of neglect and decline. And it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And I'm sitting here in Shreveport with a room of people who all know and understand what is going to happen to that taco place 20 years from now, right? It will be a used car lot. 10 years later, we'll be boarded up. We'll be searching for some kind of tax subsidy to get it torn down and rebuilt. We've all been around long enough to see this happen. This is not an anomaly. This is a pattern we see repeated over and over and over again. I have a very good friend. I actually dedicated a book to him, a guy named Joe Minicozy. He runs a firm out of Asheville, North Carolina called Urban 3. Urban 3 is a pioneer in doing financial analysis of cities. They have modeled thousands of cities around North America and to some extent around the world. What I'm going to show you right now is a series of maps that his team have put together showing financial productivity. If you think of a farm field, the part of it like a cornfield that grows up most robustly, we say that's the most productive part of the cornfield. That's where you get the most bushels per acre. When we step back and look at a city, where do you get the most value per acre? What's the most productive part of the city? I'm going to show you first starting with Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, New York is another city that I have a soft spot for. It's a city of people who are really fighting to make things better, despite decline, despite being dealt a bad hand. Buffalo, New York has experienced population loss every single year since the end of World War II. It's been a steady downward decline. Yet despite the disinvestment, despite the decline and neglect, can you point to here where the most valuable downtown complex neighborhoods of Buffalo are? All of that traditional development pattern, all of that stuff built before the Great Depression, it massively, massively outperforms everything that we've built. And it's not even close. We see this in cities of all sizes. Here's another city in upstate New York, same kind of thing. Here's just a collection of places from around the country. Here's Manchester, New Hampshire, same kind of pattern. Bozeman, Montana. When we're looking at these neighborhoods, what we're seeing is that all of the stuff that was built pre-Great Depression, this incrementally built stuff, whether you're talking about northern cities or southern cities, coastal cities or inland cities, whether you're talking about places that are highly gentrified or in decline, whether you're talking about places that have seen huge levels of investment or not, what we're looking at is a pattern of development that repeats itself over and over and over again. When I went to this little small town near me, they said, Chuck, we've got some great stuff happening out here. We've got some great stuff happening out here. These neighborhoods in here are terrible. We got to get some of this stuff torn down and get it redeveloped. And then we showed them where all their wealth is. In all those poor neighborhoods. In the neighborhoods where all their poor people live. We have created, for very understandable reasons, a kinetic growth machine to drive our economy, to make our cities prosperous, to help us as Americans grow and live healthy, productive lives. In creating this machine, what we gave up was our ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Our ability to evolve and change and look at new opportunities and new challenges in unique ways. When you operate a machine, what you get and what you talk about is how do we drive efficiency? How do we make this engine more efficient? How do we make this machine more efficient? But when you're doing the wrong thing, or when you've crossed the threshold of diminishing returns, getting more efficiency out of the same machine is only driving you in the wrong direction more quickly. The subtitle of our book is called A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild American Prosperity. Because what needs to happen right now is not new and novel ways to deploy this machine, not new and novel ways to tweak it and get more efficiency out of it. If you go to Washington, D.C., if you go to Wall Street, if you go to the state capitals, Sometimes if you go to City Hall, this is the conversations we're having. How do we make this machine more efficient? How do we do more of what we've done in the past? What we have to talk about is how we start to make better use of the stuff we've already built. How do we, in a very bottom-up way, get intimate with our neighborhoods, with our blocks, to actually drive more wealth creation, more prosperity, and get more value out of what we have already built? There's a saying that I think can help us make this mental transition from one form of viewing our cities to another. And it comes from Silicon Valley. It goes like this: innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. If we ask people what they prefer, people are going to say, I prefer smart to dumb. I would rather have things that are smart than things that are dumb. But when we look at Americans, particularly places that are high in affluence, they have an incredible preference for order over chaos. And if you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal in the middle of the night. You will tolerate an incredible amount of dumb so that you don't have to experience any chaos. At this point, what we need more than anything else is we need a little messiness at the block level. We need to experiment, to try new things, to mix things up, to test out ideas. That is going to require us as a culture to become more tolerant, especially at the block level, of a little bit of messiness, a little bit of chaos. This is another one of those maps, but this one is different than the ones I've shown you before. The ones I've shown you before have been financial productivity, value per acre. This one you can think of as a profit and loss map. This is a map of Lafayette, Louisiana. I had a hard time talking about this one last night because anytime you talk about a city in this intimate way, people get defensive. They were great last night. They had great questions. But I'm going to talk about it here in a little bit blunter way than maybe we had the conversation there. I was part of a team that was invited to Lafayette to answer the question, why are they broke? Why do they have tens of millions of dollars of backlog of road maintenance, despite spending millions and millions of dollars on new growth and new initiatives and new tax subsidies and all these things to create jobs and prosperity? Why has the prosperity been elusive for them? We went in and we analyzed every place where the city was spending money. We mapped them all out. Here's where your transit is at. Here's where your police spending is at, your fire department. Here's where your road spending is at, your sidewalk spending. Then we looked at every source of revenue that the city had. Here's where you're getting money from sales tax and property tax and utility fees. At the end of this analysis, we mashed all these maps together into one profit and loss statement. That's what you're looking at here. Every place where you see a property in blue is a property that pays more annually in taxes and fees than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. Everywhere where you see a property in red, it's the exact opposite. These are properties that cost more to service and maintain than they pay annually in tax revenue. The higher the line, the more the disparity is. What's going on here in Lafayette? Well, this part in the middle here, we kind of understand what that is, right? That's the core downtown of Lafayette, Louisiana. You've got an area right here, this crescent of blue that runs through here. Those are the poorest neighborhoods in the community. When we were going there to do our work, the city staff said, stay away from those neighborhoods over there. Those are the ones where the homicides happen, the burglaries happen. Just don't go there. This is what these places look like. None of these pass the eye test in terms of prosperity. None of us would look at these neighborhoods and say, wow, these places are prosperous. But in terms of creating wealth for the community, they're highly, highly profitable. All that stuff in red, all this stuff up here, out here, over here, Those are the malls, the big box stores, the strip malls, the franchise drive-through restaurants, the curvy, windy, cul-de-sac streets, the 3-car garage with the attached house. All that stuff that we've come to associate with prosperity, all that stuff is in the red out here. In the city of Lafayette, the median family pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the local government. In order for Lafayette to take care of everything that they built, to provide all the services that they said they would provide, median taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family makes when you get sent back to the city just to maintain what we already have. That's not going to happen. And there's no way that can possibly happen. And so at some point in Lafayette, and it's already starting to occur, they are going to have to make some very difficult decisions about what neighborhoods do we take care of, what neighborhoods do we let go, what road do we fix, what road do we let fall apart, what pipe do we maintain, what pipe do we walk away from. Does this sound like a city that we've heard of? Like all bankruptcies, it happens gradually, but then all at once. The most common question I get with this map is, why? Explain this. This defies what we have come to understand as prosperity. How can this possibly be? Explain this map. And I'll even go a step further. I was in Washington, D.C. last month with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And the question I was asked there is, what are the 5 things we can legislate that would make this come about? My answer to the questions are always disappointing to people. So I'm going to warn you, I don't have an answer. The answer ultimately is, it's complex. It's complex. There are many, many, many different things, some of which I feel I have an understanding of, others which I know are elusive to me, that are coming together to create this pattern that we see in city after city after city. Places that are as different as Manhattan and Lafayette, as different as Seattle and greater Minnesota. Let me give you a couple examples of things that I have witnessed in this city here in Lafayette that may apply to you. But understand that I'm going to give you a couple examples. There are many, many, many others, many that I don't even understand myself. In the blue areas, particularly in the blue areas over here in these poorest neighborhoods, we found places where there was sewage pipes that would run from the house, a small pipe, flow into a larger pipe, then flow by gravity down to a lift pump, where it was then pumped out to the sewage treatment facility. We found places in these red areas where sewage would flow from the house in a little pipe into a larger pipe, flow by gravity down to a lift station, and then would be pumped in a series of 20 different lift pumps and gravity pipes until it got to the treatment facility. Both of these homes are considered one home, so they both pay the same sewer bill, but they have dramatically different costs. There's one data point. Let me give you a second data point. There's a term from biology called thigmotaxis. Thigmotaxis is a Greek term that means wall loving. Jane Jacobs, in The Death and Life of Great American Cities, wrote about humans as having a propensity to stick near the wall, near the edge. Christopher Alexander, in the pattern language, noted the same thing. If you think of a mouse scurrying across a room, a mouse will stick to the edge of the wall. A deer in a field will stick towards the edge and not venture into the middle. If you look at microbes under a microscope, what you'll see is that they have a random pattern of movement until you put a metal bar in the petri dish, and then something very spooky happens. They hug the edge of the bar and line up and move in a very similar direction. Charles Darwin called evolution a conservative process. And by conservative, what he meant is that we conserve winning strategies and pass them on. So at some point in our past, maybe our ancient past, maybe our primordial past, it was a benefit to human beings to stick near the edge. Okay, look at the environment built in Lafayette, Louisiana. What do you see in the traditional downtown? You see a strong edge condition. What do you see in the this impoverished neighborhood down here, this profitable neighborhood? Well, you see buildings that line up. They don't quite form an edge yet, but you can think of iteratively this neighborhood being built incrementally over time. The buildings would start to build up, start to fill in. What are you going to have? You're going to have edges. You're going to have a development pattern that is designed to, in a sense, soothe something deep in our brain stems. What do you see in the pattern on the left here, in the red areas? You don't see edges. You don't see that same type of thing. You see a pattern that, in a sense, is anxiety-inducing for humans. If you've ever walked through a Walmart parking lot, think about the difference between that and walking down the main street here out in front of this building. It's a very different sense of comfort for us as human beings. This is a development pattern designed to, in a sense, comfort our primal urges subconsciously. This is a development pattern that doesn't really care about that. We have this epidemic of depression and suicide and anxiety that we have difficulty explaining. What would happen if we took bees and instead of having them live in hives that co-evolved with them over thousands and thousands of years, we said, we can increase your honey GDP by making bee cul-de-sacs and bee frontage roads and, bee strip malls. We would have neurotic bees. Let me give you a third example. Let's say that you are going on the outskirts of town in a traditional development pattern and you're going to build a house. You're a poor person because that's who would build such houses. And you and your poor neighbors are all going to build homes with the hopes that ultimately the city will continue to grow, the land underneath your property become more valuable, and you would become better off as a result. But you understand that the minimum threshold for your success is the capacity of you and the people who are joining you in this endeavor to sustain the street in front of your house. If you can't meet that threshold, your place is not going to work. How do you build your house? Well, you build your house skinny and deep. That way you share that burden with many, many, many other people. Many other people can join with you, either going out with shovels and rakes or paying taxes to another entity who would maintain it on your behalf. Now, what happens when you create a kinetic growth machine and you stop getting that painful feedback that, hey, this isn't working. Hey, you can't continue to build like this. You're going to go broke. What happens? Well, the house just changes. It just shifts. Instead of building narrow and deep, we build shallow and broad. It's the same exact house. It's just laid out a different way. This is how you go from having 5 feet of pipe per person to 50 feet of pipe per person and not really being any better off. When we look at things like the apex, species in this development pattern, we see things like a Kmart worth $384,000 an acre, a Walmart worth $967,000. These are huge investments in a piece of property. But yet in the same city, when we go to the core downtown, here's a supper club at $5 million an acre, and my favorite all-time place, Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. 10 times the productivity of the Kmart, 3.5 times the productivity of the Walmart. One of the things I love about this city, and one of the things that I have found inspiring about the people that I have met here, is unlike other places, you don't look down on Jimmy's Pizza. We can talk about the reasons that is, but I spend a lot of my time going around to places saying, Jimmy's Pizza is not beneath you. When we think about development today, we think about huge, broad strokes. We think about bold moves. We think about things like this. How do we get the next big thing? How do we get the next bold thing? Look at the wealth being created by Jimmy's Pizza. It's astounding. And we all understand something very important about this as well, right? Who is Jimmy? Who is Jimmy? Jimmy is not these people here. And mind you, I don't have a problem with these people here. I'm asked all the time, will you come and help us stop this Walmart? And I say, no, I won't do it. Everything about how we have set up our zoning and building codes, our financing standards, our secondary markets, the way we go about building roads and streets and making transportation, all this stuff is designed to create this. These people are just the byproduct of what we have said we want. Don't hate them. Hate the system we've created. But who is Jimmy? Well, you know who Jimmy is, right? Jimmy's your neighbor. Jimmy goes to the same church that you go to. Jimmy has kids in the same school that your kids go to. Jimmy sponsors a local softball team. Jimmy has a float in your 4th of July parade. Jimmy uses a local accountant, a local attorney. He banks at a local bank. Jimmy is a part of your economic ecosystem. What we need more than anything is not this. We need more Jimmys. We need to create within our structure of building this bottom-up revolution where we are creating Jimmy after Jimmy after Jimmy. Here's how we go about doing this. I'm going to give you a couple things from the book. There's a lot more in there, but these are the critical ones that we can do right now. First, we need to allow the next increment of building by right. I have been astounded, and I'm going to say something challenging right now. So, modest trigger warning. I've showered a lot of love on you. I'm going to do the opposite here for a second. One thing that I am astounded about your city is, given the relative level of want and need and, dare I say, desperation, you are incredibly bureaucratic. You are bizarrely bureaucratic. I go to very affluent cities, and very affluent cities have the wherewithal to be incredibly bureaucratic. They have a lot of red tape. They have a lot of rules and regulations. And they tolerate it because their affluence allows them to, in a sense, overcome it. Sometimes it's even used as a defensive mechanism. We're very affluent, and so we're going to have a very high bar of entry, lots of red tape, lots of stuff you have to go through, and that will keep out anybody who can't reach this level. For some reason, you have this level of bureaucracy and red tape and requirement. Why? I've spent a lot of time in Memphis, Tennessee, which I actually kept using today as an analog for you to go and visit, for people here in this community to go and experience. I have a soft spot for Memphis. Memphis has done some amazing, amazing things. I think one of the things they have done that is the most innovative, though, is they have actually said, we are not going to let the kind of bureaucratic grind of running a city stand in the way of us making incremental progress. When we build the next increment by right, when you can take whatever property you have and make the next step in making it better, we unleash a massive amount of entrepreneurial spirit and capacity. Everybody, every single property in the city must be able to, with the minimum amount of friction, go to the next level of whatever intensity would be on that site. There's a certain restraint I want to put in with this. We talked a little bit today about opportunity zones. I know in my city, which by the way, the entire city is an opportunity zone, my little town leads the state almost always in unemployment, and that leads the state as in worst, not best. We have the highest level of unemployment. We have lots of neighborhoods that struggle. You can buy a home in my city for $50,000, $60,000. This is often a very, very poor place and looked at as such. But we're all excited about opportunity zones now. And the reason we're excited about them is we're thinking we're going to get millions of dollars of capital flooding in, and that this will utterly overnight change and transform neighborhoods. They will be unrecognizable. We're going to go from houses that are $50,000 to houses that are $300,000 and $400,000 and $500,000. This is not the way to build broad prosperity in a community. If you look at a neighborhood of $50,000 homes, if you can next year make that a neighborhood of $55,000 homes, you've just increased the wealth in that neighborhood by 10%. That is a massive increase in the value of your collective portfolio. If you take a neighborhood of $50,000 homes and your goal is to make it a neighborhood of $300,000 homes, yes, you've utterly transformed that neighborhood as well. You've increased the tax base a phenomenal amount. But you've done two other things that you don't want to do. The first thing, nobody who lived in that neighborhood before is going to live in that neighborhood after. They're now gone. That neighborhood is utterly different and changed from what it was. So all the people that were there are not going to share. Your neighbors are not going to share in that wealth creation. The second thing you've done is you stagnated every other neighborhood around it. Because why would you improve anything? Why would you take that $55,000 house and do the things that are necessary to make it a $50,000 house and do the things necessary to make it a $55,000 house? Why would you do that? If you know that the end result is it's going to be bought up, torn down, and converted into something massive. So cities that don't restrain themselves in this way create pockets of huge leaps and then wide swaths of neighborhoods that stagnate and do nothing. We have to embody the notion that every neighborhood should change. Every neighborhood should evolve, but no neighborhood should experience radical change. We need to give ourselves an incremental development pattern where neighborhoods are shifting, evolving, and changing over time. We must, and this gets back to the bureaucratic challenge, we must lower the bar of entry. When we create an artificially high bar of entry, what we do is we make sure that a lot of people won't be allowed to play the game. We've done this really bizarre thing in this country, particularly in places that struggle. What we have said is, for all, I'm willing to say compassionate reasons, for all kind reasons, we've said if you want to play the game, you have to meet this bar of entry. You must, if you want to play the game, be able to afford a 30-year mortgage. You must be able to own 2 cars. You must be able to have a college degree. If you want to open that commercial business, you must be able to invest the money in a sprinkler system. We've said all these things, and we've created this very high bar for compassionate reasons. But what that means is that anybody who can't reach that high bar doesn't get to participate fully in the society we've created. Then we have this warped conversation on top of it. How much should we take from the people we do allow to participate and give to the people who we don't allow to participate so that they can have a meager existence? Wendell Berry said, if we don't allow people to subsistence farm, we rob them of their agency. We rob them of their capacity to start with nothing and end up with something. We have to allow people in our communities to start with nothing and have a path to end with something. Let me show you what this looks like. This is something that today we call a tiny house. Our ancestors would have called this a house. For thousands and thousands of years, people would start with very small homes. As they saved a little bit of money, they would do a little addition. As the kids were born, they would maybe add a second story. A neighbor would come over and help out. You would go help a neighbor. This is the way we build communities incrementally for all time. We can go to the neighborhoods in this city that were built prior to the Great Depression, and you are going to see, if you look very closely, these multiple iterations of a place. A little box with an addition and another addition and another addition. Today, if you want to build something like this, what do you have to do? Well, first of all, you have to meet all the standards of a house. Then you have to go and you have to meet like 18 other substandards for a tiny house. You have to go beg permission from a city council or a planning board. You have to go grovel in front of your neighbors and demonstrate to them that you won't create chaos and mayhem in the neighborhood. This kind of thing should be allowed by right, the very lowest friction kind of thing you can possibly do. Here's a commercial example of lowering the bar. This is from Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon, Michigan, rapidly deindustrialized city, lost tens of thousands of residents, had a downtown that had lots of vacancies. They were struggling to fill. They recognized at a certain point that the bar to entry was too high. People didn't have the money to convert the bathrooms to ADA compliant. They didn't have the money to bring everything up to code, to put in sprinkler systems, to do all the stuff you needed to do. These were entrepreneurs trying to figure out a business. They didn't have that. And so what Muskegon did is they took a block that they had that was empty, had nothing on it, a gap in their streetscape. They went and bought a bunch of storage sheds and they filled it in. They painted them up, funky colors, and they rent them out to startup entrepreneurs, crazy people who don't know they can fail. They rent them out very, very cheaply. They let these people come in and try out their business, basically figure out how they can be of service to their neighbors and make a profit doing it. These places are always full. There's a waiting list to get in them. And here's the amazing thing. Guess what else is full now? The core downtown. A lot of these startup entrepreneurs who didn't know how to run a business, didn't know what they were doing, had an idea for a new kind of soap or t-shirts or whatever their crazy thing that they wanted to do was, they would go out into these storage sheds and at $75 a month, they would get started. They would figure out how to make their business profitable. They would figure out how to make it work. And many of them then graduated to the core downtown. They could go to a bank and say, here's my proven business model. Here's my next step. Here's what I want to do. We have to lower the bar of entry and let more people participate in our game. And if we do that, what we will see is that our communities have an amazing amount of untapped entrepreneurial potential. As a final thing, we have to change the way we make public investments. I'm an engineer, I'm a planner. I can't tell you the number of meetings I've sat through where we as the professionals of the community would hatch the next great plan that we were going to do, something that was going to happen that we would bring about prosperity and investment and economic development. We would then turn around and sell it to the community, get on board with our big project, get on board with our big vision. We are done building infrastructure. We have built more roads than we have the capacity to maintain. We have built more miles of pipe, more sidewalk, more curb, more drainage systems than we will ever be able to sustain. Our cities are going to geographically become smaller over the next generation. What our challenge is to go back and make better use of the stuff we've already built, to squeeze more value, more wealth out of what we have already put in the ground as an investment. And the only way we do that is by getting hyper local with our understanding of how these systems are being used. At Strong Towns, we've created a 4-step process to make the best public investments that we can make. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Go out with humility and observe where your friends and neighbors, the people who live in the community, are having a difficult time using the city as it has been built. I'm going to stress humility here. Don't go out thinking you know the answers. Don't go out thinking you know what the problem is. Go out and literally walk with people. Experience the city along with them. Experience it not just through their eyes, not just walking in their shoes, but alongside of them. Understand where it is difficult from their perspective to make use of what we have built. Step number 2, ask a very simple question. What is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? Not what is the ultimate fix for this, not what is the big project that will cure this for all time, not what is the thing that we can get a federal grant or a state project to do. What is the thing that we can go out and do with duct tape and paint and straw bales and cones to make this struggle a little bit easier? Step number 3, do that thing. Do that thing right now. Don't form a committee. Don't study it for 6 months. Don't hire a consultant to come in. This is a small little thing. Just go do it. Step number 4, repeat this process over and over and over. Jay Jacobs called cities a co-creation, something that we build together. In this kinetic growth machine, cities have become places that are bequeathed upon us, something that we pay our taxes for others to do on our behalf. If you go to city halls around the country today, one of the things that have crept in that I find particularly pernicious is this idea of customer service. How's our customer service today? Are we treating the customer nice? We are not customers. If anything, we are shareholders in a municipal corporation. We are people vested in the future of this community. We are in this together. We have to give the people in our cities agency to co-create a place with us. And when we observe where people struggle with humility, when we walk a mile in their shoes, when we discipline ourselves to respond to those struggles iteratively, what we allow people to do is to demonstrate to us the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge. To create these positive feedback loops where we iteratively build a city collaboratively together. We can continue down this process here. We can continue to identify the latest fad from the American Planning Association Journal, go out and build that thing, try to create instant pop-up prosperity without doing the hard work of actually building a place. And we will find that we continue to experience decline, that prosperity is elusive, and that we are ultimately frustrated. Or we can go out and humble ourselves to observe where people struggle, to be mindful of the experience of others, to with humility take small incremental steps to make life better. And if we do this day after day, month after month, year after year, not only will we be making the lowest risk, highest possible returning investments that we can make, we cannot help but improve people's lives in the process. And that's ultimately what a Strong Towns approach is all about. Thank you for having me here tonight and for coming out. I appreciate it. We're going to set up some chairs and do a little bit of Q&A. Go ahead and start doing that. I have just one other quick thing that I want to say, if you'll indulge me just for a moment while they're doing this. I have been very fortunate to have some people in your community be incredibly generous to me. The people in Allendale for no good reason, have invited me in, been very kind and inviting to me, shared with me what's going on in their neighborhood. I have to admit, when I first heard about the I-49 highway going through the middle of an impoverished African-American neighborhood, I said, no way. That's not happening. We don't do that anymore. That's not the kind of thing that we do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. I think that it is an absolute travesty what has been done to the people of this neighborhood. Not only because this is a place of great spirit, entrepreneurialism, love. These are words that I'm speaking as an engineer, talking about love of people for a place and for each other. The idea that we would hang this sword of Damocles over their heads for literally years and years and years, artificially stagnating a neighborhood, while we make a decision on whether we're going to run a highway we can't afford for returns that will never happen, is wrong on so many levels it's hard to fathom. If this city wants to do something moral and good, you will demand an end to this entire conversation about this highway and free up this neighborhood. I was given a study that had been done on your behalf, evaluating the economic impacts of the I-49 corridor through Allendale. It laid out in great detail all of the wonderful economic benefits that this project would bring you. And it was being passed around in your leadership communities and other places here, including the state capitol and in Washington, D.C., as evidence of how great this investment was. I will say right now, this entire report was a fraud. I wrote a probably 6,000, 7,000 word, 3-part series going into every little assertion that was made in it. If you have any doubts about this, go on our website, strongtowns.org, just type in Shreveport, you're gonna get a ton of stuff. What we systematically do to neighborhoods like Allendale in pursuit of this kinetic growth machine is harming not only them, but harming all of us. And we have to stand up and say, no more of this stuff. No more of this stuff. The Louisiana DOT can't maintain the stuff they've already built. The federal government and the highway department cannot maintain the stuff we've already built. We do not have the luxury of wasting decades debating whether we should drop money we don't have on a project we don't need. So it's up to you to demand of everybody that you meet that this no longer be tolerated in your community. So, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
We're going to ask questions and take questions from the audience, but we've got all of the hands up.
Let's get right behind Ryan.
Miss Gail. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, Miss Gail.
Hi.
Dr. Gail.
I'm supposed to be live here to see your event, because that's my hometown.
Okay.
So I have a different perspective when you view, but that's your story. But I want to talk about Shreveport, and it's been bothering me since the election. I don't want to flare up anybody, because I want to talk about the governor election. I want to talk about the bond, three bond proposal. Now, in your overview, your story, you discussed where we have to invest in our city. That might be the term you use. And I'm a researcher. So, I serve on the Citizen Bond Committee. I have the insight of every need that was needed in the city of Shreveport. I asked them the streets, I asked administrators to do a PowerPoint to show us where all of the needs were in the city of Shreveport. So it did not, I think I might, Mayor, since the mayor not here, I'm gonna take credit for grouping those propositions with all the needs in the area as proposition 1, 2, and 3. What happened? They failed. How are we going to move Shreveport forward? Now, I know.
Gail, do you have a specific question about the presentation?
Yes, that's my question. Are you familiar with the bond that just passed? I mean, that just failed? There's 3 propositions.
He's not. We haven't discussed any of that with them.
Okay, well.
I'm vaguely familiar. Let me, as by way of, I think, answering.
So what is it? We have towards Shreveport.
Yeah.
What
Well,
is it that you?
I think there's a couple things. Let me try to answer what I think your question is. I think first of all, with respect, I don't think it's possible for the smartest person in the room to actually identify I can't remember the word you used, but the problems that we're facing. I really do believe in that last series of slides I put, where I think when I look at the city through an engineering lens, I'm seeing a very different set of problems than when you look at it through your lens, or you look at it through your lens. The thing about complex adaptive systems is they harmonize many competing interests over time. When there's a bond issue put forward, it's generally, it's a construction bond. Here's the big projects we're going to do, or here's the things we're going to do on your behalf. And quite frankly, these fail quite often, not because these things don't need to be done, and not because these things are not urgent, but because, quite frankly, they don't address the immediate concerns that people actually have. And because cities are not addressing the real concerns that people have, there's a huge credibility gap when we come and ask voters to approve things. If we were out sweeping the streets and taking care of the garbage and patching the sidewalks and doing the things that we needed to do, and then we came and said, hey, guess what? We're way behind in money and we'll continue to do this, I think people would be in a much different situation. But as it is today, I travel around this city, and I travel around Lafayette, quite frankly, and I see basically a system, and I'm not going to point to the city because I think it's beyond the city. I think it's a general system that is not serving the people here. It's a system that is oriented, and I think the I-49 is like a prime example of this. It's a system that places local government at the bottom of a food chain, orienting up, saying, what scraps can we get that drop from the table? What we need to orient in service to each other. And if we can do that, we ask a completely different set of questions, none of which are going to show up on a bond referendum.
So, to your point, the one that came close to passing was the water and sewer, which is what the citizens, I guess, felt they needed more, which is urgent to be here.
Dr. Gale.
I see this scenario. Thank you.
Well, I will say this. The way that the bonds were prepared and the way they went out left a lot of people with a lot of questions. And when you think about how broke we are and how much debt we're putting on a declining population, the smarter thing for us to do would have been to have gone out in smaller chunks, prove that we can take care of that money, and then go out for the next piece once we've earned that trust. We don't earn trust by saying, just give me a chance to do it and I'll prove I can do it. And we've already had this many failures before, but this is the thing. This is a whole different kind of conversation tonight, and I don't want to derail all of it by going there. But I want to go ahead and engage Chuck about the infrastructure cult. That was one of my favorite things in the book. I just kind of laughed when you went on to the infrastructure cult.
It was gratuitous on my behalf. You want me to talk about what this is? So, chapter 4 of the book is all about this cult of infrastructure that we've created, this idea that, and it really goes in with this kinetic growth concept, that if we just invest in more infrastructure, and I start the chapter with a bunch of quotes from across the political spectrum and different economists and different advisors saying, isn't it obvious that we just need to spend way more on infrastructure? And the absurdity of it is that they all cite this group called the American Society of Civil Engineers. Have you ever been a member?
I used to be the president.
So I was a member during undergrad. I was a member briefly. So this is an organization that's often cited as like the expert on infrastructure spending. ASCE put out this report that said we need to spend over the next decade, let me say it the other way. If we don't spend on transportation over the next decade, $1.1 million, I said this wrong again. Over the next decade, our families are going to lose $1 trillion due to our failure to invest in infrastructure. And you're like, oh my gosh, $1 trillion, that sounds horrible. How much do we need to invest, ASCE? Oh, $2.2 trillion. Over the next 40 years, our families are going to lose, our businesses and our GDP is going to fail to grow, and we will have, as a federal government, $900 billion less revenue than we otherwise would have. Okay, that sounds really bad. We need $900 billion. What do? Well, we spend $6.6 trillion on infrastructure. What we have created is a national dialogue around infrastructure investments that are far, far divorced from what's actually going on the ground. And the numbers at the federal level are absurd. The numbers at the local level are offensive. When the federal government comes in and they build a road for you and they spend 90% of the cost and you spend 10%, it feels like growth. It feels like success. Then 30 years later, it's now 100% yours to maintain. Now that's a noose around your neck. It's like a millstone weighing you down. The numbers don't work at the federal level at all. At the local level, they've gone beyond absurd into offensive. We have saddled cities with obligations that they never will meet, and it's forcing you to make really horrible decisions. And it's only going to get worse. We have to change this. Whenever you hear an economist or a federal politician or whatever talking about infrastructure, know that they either don't know what they're talking about, they're lying to you, or they don't care. But it's one of those three.
Tim Fletcher.
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm sorry for the family having a good time in there.
It's kind of been strange because I look back and then there's these people completely disengaged, and I'm trained to watch for engagement, and I'm like, what are these? Oh, they're in the restaurant.
Hey, really glad you're here, and it seems like a lot of cities use arenas, coliseums, football
Says the
stadiums
guy with the sports shirt on.
as kind of an attraction to bring jobs. If we build a stadium, we're going to have $10 billion of revenue coming in. Our city has done that as well. It's kind of dangled a new arena, for instance, of what that could bring. Not a big fan of that personally. But we've also had studies where we have parks that generate 9 baseball diamonds, 5 soccer fields, and we'll have communities come to Shreveport to have tournaments and stay in our hotels and stop at Jimmy's Pizza and all that good stuff. But we don't seem to ever do that. We just kind of keep pushing those studies aside while towns like Ruston, Natchitoches, Marohn, Sulphur, Louisiana build these incredible complexes that are bringing in all this tax revenue. In your studies around the country, have you seen anywhere where a city has built an arena and downtown has been the savior for it and it's been a blessing, or has it been a noose? And have you seen cities where you do something similar, smaller, where you build parks where kids locally can enjoy it, families locally can enjoy it, but it also brings in communities and people from East Texas, South Arkansas, South Louisiana here, they can be a benefit. Just let them know that's something you address.
I like the way you worded that, and I'm going to respond specifically to your wording, because I have seen cities that have success coincide with stadium construction. I mentioned Memphis earlier tonight. I think Memphis is a great city. Memphis has some amazing stuff happening in the downtown. They also invested in a stadium for their basketball team, and I think many people there would correlate those two together. I don't, but I think many people would. In a complex adaptive system, it's difficult to tease out what causes what. Memphis also built a stadium in the 80s or early 90s to attract that basketball team. It was a big pyramid down on the Mississippi River. It sat empty for 15 years because when the Grizzlies came to town, they didn't like the stadium. The city built them another stadium. The city spent $200 million in public subsidy to get Bass Pro to occupy that. The city would tell you, or some people in the city would tell you, oh, this has been a huge success. Again, I'm skeptical. If you took $200 million and made incremental neighborhood investments out of it, I think you would be, 10x, 20x, 100x richer than doing it that way. The two things that I like to say about stadiums are as follows. One, Rome did not build the Colosseum in order to get Rome. The Colosseum was the culmination of literally centuries and centuries and centuries of incremental building where they got to the point where they're like, hey, this place is awesome. We can afford we can build a stadium. That's how the sequencing works. These things are not the catalyst for success, they're always the culmination of success. I think the other thing that's important when we talk about these kind of public facilities is that there's always a certain, in all these studies, there's a certain level of confirmation bias built into them. Here's how I always try to get around that. When the city staff comes to me and says, we're ready to do this, or the elected officials or what have you, I always say, okay, if this is a great investment, let's do it. But instead of going and borrowing the money, let's fund it with your pension fund. And then we'll use the return from the investment to juice the returns of your pension fund. And if the returns are awesome, your pension will be really, really high. Just like your report and study says. Let's do that. And what happens is that kills every project where it's brought up. Because what happens is we are human, we have a desire, we then create a narrative to explain why we should have that desire, whether it's an ice cream cone or a stadium, and then we go out and consume that. And I think that we have to be more rigorous with ourselves. I would avoid those kind of projects, especially here, until you've spent a couple decades incrementally building stuff. We were in that park today, that last one. I don't know how much that cost people or what that was, but that was awesome. And if you're talking about the stadiums as like a quality of life kind of investment, I'm with you. I love the Minnesota Twins. I go to games every year. I think it's fantastic. That little park is bringing a lot of joy to a ton of people at like a very low cost.
Which park are you talking about?
Common Park?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Downtown. Thanks so much, Chris Lyon. All right, next to Janie and then Mike.
Hi. Thank you for coming, by the way. As you were talking about the benefits of local businesses like Jimmy's, the accountant, and lawyers, all those kind of services, it made a lot of sense. But something occurred to me of how different that is from how I live and how I create value. I work remotely, and my service is selling outsourcing and other remote work for companies in the U.S. and other parts of the world. And so I'm generating value all the time, and I'm using local services, but I'm not really of wherever I am. I'm free to live wherever I want. And I'm certainly not alone, and increasingly so. But strictly in dollar sense, I am generating a lot of value, and I was wondering how you think that's going to affect the way people choose to live in one place or another, because now I don't have to be in an expensive city to get a good job. Am I going to go to a place with a cheaper cost of living? Am I going to choose to spend more when I don't strictly need to? And in aggregate, how do you see that new nature of work and value affecting the way cities grow?
I think it's a great question. I think ultimately it's unanswerable as a predictor. I've seen people argue that what it means is that New York City will have everybody. I think that's absurd. I see people living in Detroit who do programming out of San Francisco, and they move to Detroit because on 1 month's salary they can buy a house, on 2 months' salary they can fully renovate it, and on 3 months' salary they can buy tickets to the opera and every sports team that they want to have season tickets to. They can live an incredibly high quality of life. So I think that type of work is going to ultimately be a benefit for more places than just the big cities. But there's people who believe the opposite, and I wouldn't bet on it. I don't know. I do think it's important to point out, though, from the perspective of Shreveport, from the perspective of the city, how what you're actually doing is different than Jimmy's in a very important way. What you are doing is something that we would call in economic terms, you're doing an import replacement. You're bringing in capital into the community. Instead of you being the commodity that goes out and works somewhere, you're actually staying here, and that capital that comes in the terms of your salary, comes into the community. Jimmy's Pizza, on the other hand, is not an import replacement business. What Jimmy's Pizza does is allow your money to essentially circulate around the community before it exits again. Think of the antithesis of this, the dollar store. The dollar store is a very popular thing, particularly in poor neighborhoods, because a lot of these places are food deserts and you can't get things. And the dollar store comes in as essentially like a predatory business to suck out the last remaining bit of wealth out of these places, providing what is an essential service. If we could find some way locally to provide those essential services, the money that's in those communities could pass around before it exits in some way. When you come here and buy a drink or a dinner next door, your money is being passed around the community. When you buy gasoline, a little of it stays at the local gas station, but most of it goes out. So we need basically both. We need a lot of people like you who are, in a sense, exporting your services and importing capital, people who export goods and finished materials and import capital. And then we also need the Jimmies so that that capital has many, many ways to pass around the community a number of times before it exits out again. So I hope we continue to attract here people like you. I think the key to it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the key to it is continuing to increase the quality of life so that you enjoy a quality of life that isn't the same as what you'd have in New York and San Francisco, but is meaningful enough to you to justify like the lower price point of entry.
So, Mike, then Tim, then
Chuck, I read your book, and I'm a bit of a numbers guy myself, and an analysis. And I was hoping you were going to come here so I could ask you a question. And that is, in your book, you talked about that in your town and in your state, property tax is the only source of revenue for your town, basically. Now, that's not true here. I think somebody told me, I think our property tax is about 1/3 of our city revenue. I don't have our budget here lately in front of me. So, I totally buy all the strong town concepts. My question, though, is how much does that need to be modified in a place that has sales tax? Because these big box stores, which I try not to go to as much as I can, generate a lot of sales tax revenue. Now, would that same amount of sales tax revenue be generated by smaller stores that also gave more property tax? So that's the question. But how have you handled the sales tax question in your talks before?
Thank you. It's a fantastic question. It's a big part of why I went to Lafayette with that team. We don't at Strong Towns, and I don't do any consulting anymore. This has been more than I can handle. The one exception over the last 8 years was when I was invited to be part of the Lafayette project. And I did that for two reasons. One, there was an outstanding question on how those value per acre maps related to actual profitability of a city. Were the places that were high value, were those actually the most profitable? And the answer to that was yes. When we line up the value per acre map, the productivity map in Lafayette with the profitability map, there's a very tight correlation. The other question was, what happens in a city with a high percentage of sales tax like Lafayette? And the answer is, it's the same distribution. Let me dig into that nuance a little bit because I think it's unfair just to say it's the same, and particularly since you're a numbers guy. One of the challenges that we had was to try to look at the big box stores and allocate the sales tax revenue between revenue that would be there if the big box store wasn't there and revenue that is being captured because there's a big box. If you live in a community and you go to the big box store to buy your toothpaste and toilet paper, it's not like cities didn't have toothpaste and toilet paper before Walmart. They certainly did. You would get it a different way. What Walmart does is it displaces some of your local transactions, and this was the thing about gutting downtown. Some of your transactions that would happen locally now happen at Walmart. What Walmart does though, so that's kind of like a wash. And what we did is we figured out what percentage of a typical family's budget was those kind of non-discretionary things that they would spend regardless. Then we said the rest of that we can attribute to Walmart as a percentage. And anybody who's not in the city, like people who drive 5 miles to come into the city to go to Walmart, those are people we would not have captured with a local neighborhood store. So what is the percent that they bring in? And the Lafayette map shows what that is. And it's really, like, from a profit and loss standpoint, no different than the property tax system. I mean, the ultimate end result essentially looks the same and the ratios are the same. The Walmart loses you money. The mall loses you money. And it loses you money not because it's not generating a lot of revenue, but because it has an enormous amount of costs associated with it. When you look at that, 20-acre Walmart site, understand that you've got millions of dollars of pipe in the ground to provide its service. You have all these police calls out there all the time that take up your capacity. You have to have fire trucks, sited in a certain location with a capacity to respond. And these all have like exponential costs to them. So there's a huge cost. I think that the most important takeaway though is this. Regardless of how you tax, whether it's a property tax, a land tax, a series of fees, a sales tax, a tax on frowning, I don't really care what it is. You can only tax people with the wealth that they have. This is the problem we see in Ferguson, Missouri. Ferguson, Missouri, this kind of city made famous by, Michael Brown and the whole, aftermath of his killing. You see this situation where now it's revealed that this city can't balance its budget. They can't even pay the interest on their debt without, through normal means of taxation. They actually have to try to extract the wealth through this kind of punitive series of fines, to where it was something like 1 out of every 3 people have a warrant out for their arrest in Ferguson because of fines and successive, police interventions. They were balancing their budget. I mean, a huge, 50-60% of their budget came from this extractive revenue through police departments. If we build wealth, and that wealth is broadly experienced, we can collect that tax to pay for stuff. If we don't build wealth, no matter how we try to tax it, it's just not there. It's just not there. And so at the end of the day, I'm less concerned with what type of tax system you have than are you building wealth or not.
I'm glad you mentioned Ferguson because I wasn't sure how to get into it without you bringing it up directly. But it seems like a good place to ask about out-migration. And I'll just say it. My first novel is going to be called The Flying Whites.
Yeah.
So in the book, you talk about how it's not just something that we can pin solely on racism, but on the economics and the stagnation and the timing of it all. Talk about that for a minute. Well, no, talk about that, but also where we are right now, I'm kind of like, if people want to move out into a gated community, let them go. They're too expensive to keep. Let's not annex them back in. Let's take whatever we have left and try to maintain what's in our core and take better care of it and attract more people that want to live with the people that are here as diverse as they are and as much as they enjoy all the local amenities and opportunities. But what I hear back is, but that's our tax base.
So let me try to deal with both of those things. I wrote in the book that I thought white flight is a unnecessarily narrow term, narrow description. That what was going on, I think, was driven, I call race an accelerating factor. But you can look at my city, which, Brainerd, Minnesota. When we talk about diversity, what we're referring to is Norwegians, Swedes, and Finns. That's our level of diversity. We experience the same exact thing as the most segregated cities experience, which is our affluent people picked up and left, our poorer people stayed behind. You see this in Salt Lake City, in Provo, in cities that have like zero racial diversity. You see the same effect. There's no doubt that race is an accelerating factor, though. And, when we look at things like redlining and how we, at the very federal level on down, allocated capital in growing our cities. I talked about post-World War II, this kinetic growth machine, and how our vision was, if we're being very generous, that we would create this broad prosperity that could be shared by all. I think that was if you listen to progressives or read progressives at the time, they looked at it as very much a justice kind of thing. That's absolutely not how it worked out. When it got down to the ground, instead of providing a plot of land for everybody over time, what we did is we tracked certain segments of our population in core cities. We put a line on paper and said, you can't come here, and this is the place where we're going to put all the money and all the capital. Sorry about that. We also said, where are the neighborhoods where people can't fight back? Where are the neighborhoods that are poor? That's where we're going to run our highways through the middle of and bisect. And we did that systematically over and over again. I draw the distinction between race as the cause and race as an accelerator because I do think a couple of things have happened in the interim. First, a lot of our cities have become more diverse, and more diverse in a way that I think is healthy and has with it, a social component that we all look at as being positive. That being said, we still have huge disparities, and those disparities often line up along race. And if you look at what is happening to our cities today, what we see in cities, particularly ones that are very quickly growing and gentrifying, what we see is that the wealthy people that decamp to the edge are now relocating back in the center. And the people who are left behind are largely being pushed out. If you abandon poor people in the center of a city, you are abandoning them in ways that are despotic and cruel, and we can look back at the 50s and 60s and say these are, were urban ghettos and urban wastelands and places of high crime and poverty, and we lament that. But these were also neighborhoods that still had some coherence to them. People could still walk to a grocery, they could still get on a bus to a job, they still had neighbors and people to be a support system. When we dislocate poor people to the edges of our cities, and we say wealthy people are going to occupy the center and poor people are going to get moved out to the edge, we do something despotic in a whole nother degree of despotism. Because if you try to be poor and live in places that are built with the assumption of permanent affluence, you try to walk 2 miles across drainage ditches and 4-lane roads and fenced off places and you try to walk that to go get the basic needs of your day. And you see how despotic this way of living is for someone who can't afford it. What we run the risk of doing is creating the second rendition of what has become white flight. The second one being like 10 times as bad on humans, on people, on our friends and neighbors as what the first one was. And that's why that incremental development pattern is so important, because what we want to do is we want to thicken up our neighborhoods. We want to make them more prosperous, but we want to do it in a way where we're bringing and including more people in that, not just dislocating people for a new version of America.
Cool.
Spoken like an engineer.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to follow up with something like YIMBYism and putting mother-in-laws in the backyard, but go ahead.
Yeah. I had a question about this idea of finding the next smallest step. Before I ask that, though, I want to just let you guys know we're getting close to our time here, but there'll be a book signing afterwards, and we've got a table in the back that has some information about ReForm, and there's an email list if you guys would like to keep up to date with what we're doing. a lot of what we've done has been inspired by Chuck and a lot of people about finding that next smallest step, and we've tried to do that in projects like our Highland Park project. There's some bike infrastructure that's going on that we've tried to apply some of these principles and utilize citizens like you that are really interested and engaged and interested in making our city better and helping you and giving you the tools to interact with business owners who can also help with that cause and with city leadership as well. And so that kind of brings me to my question. And Strong Towns had a little webinar the other day, and I asked a similar question that Chuck had a really good answer to. But my question is when we're looking towards the way that we interact with our city officials, with our administrations, with our city staff people that are in technical fields like engineering or parks and recreation, how should we be engaging with them to kind of push forward this vision that you have for Strong Towns, and what do we look for in those people when we are going through elections and all these things, and how do we increase that relationship, and instead of it being kind of a relationship that's not great, how do we engage those people in a way that moves us forward?
Start with complimenting their hair.
Nice hair.
You're awesome. I don't remember how I answered that question, so I feel like I'm the wrong person to ask, because when we go to my hometown, if we did something like this in Brainerd, it would be a room full of people who dislike me, who would be throwing things at me. Strong Towns, I've often said, is like therapy for me. You're never a prophet in your own land. It's very difficult for me. I told Jacob this week, he's like, do you ever get nervous when you give these talks? And I'm like, I give talks, rooms of 1,000 people. I never get nervous in the tiniest bit. Like, I love doing it. I feel very comfortable doing this. The only time I get nervous is when I give a talk in my hometown. And it can be to like 5 ladies at the knitting club. And I'm like a nervous, absolute nervous wreck. Oh yeah. But I mean, you know, it's this, it's hard in your hometown. So I would start with acknowledging that what I'm talking about in like an abstract theoretical sense is very real for you. It's very real for all of you. And it's very hard to separate your personal emotions, your love for a place, your feeling of both belonging and potential rejection from every one of these conversations. And so if we're going to engage in the arena and have these talks, we have to lead with a certain level of empathy. And it's a certain level of empathy that I don't think comes natural to engineers like us. We tend to be more logical and rational and like, well, you know, 1 + 1 = 2, live with it. And I think, you know, I often will ask my wife to help me think through how to say things like that when I'm going to be in those settings. I also just think that when we're looking for leaders in our community, when we're looking for people to fill key positions at City Hall as technical staff, when we're looking to bring in consultants and experts to help us, when we're looking to vote for people to lead us, I think that the next version or the next model of that kind of local leader looks a lot more like a servant than a general. They look a lot more like someone who says, I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to roll up my sleeves with you and walk with you and figure it out. As opposed to someone who comes in and says, I have a grand vision, I'm going to march us through and capture this hill, get on board and follow me. I think that we have to, particularly where we're at today at the local level, just embody a servant, humble mentality as we go about our work, and understand that building a community is work. It's something we do together. It's a co-creation. And so if I were hiring people, if I were bringing people in, that's the disposition I would look for, more than expertise, confidence, any of that. Humility, empathy, the ability to communicate, a willingness to be a servant.
We have to wrap up. I'm sorry, but the city engineer is here. And one time we were in a meeting, and he said, "Don't make things pretty. We make things work." I'm gonna get him a T-shirt that says that for Christmas.
And I would say the most genius places make things work in a way that is beautiful. And really, if you look at the way that our ancestors, and I say that in the broadest possible expression of the term, around the world for thousands of years, in different cultures, different latitudes, if you look at the places people built, they were functional, and even the dirt poorest places also added an element of beauty and aesthetic to it. And so, push back on your engineer. He's not right.
No, I thought it was funny.
We gotta make him. We gotta make it. Complex systems harmonize many competing objectives, and I think as an engineer, I often discount, or I've been guilty in the past of discounting just the sheer beauty of something. No, it should be front and center like all the other things.
I'm sorry, city engineer.
You're awesome.
Yeah.
You are awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks so
You
much for coming.
can ask questions online too.
All right, folks in the back.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in to Heliopolis' coverage of the ReForm Shreveport event with Strong Towns here at Art Space in downtown. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you're interested, check out reformshreveport.com and strongtowns.org. Until then, we will see you soon.